Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the all-new 2024 Toyota 4Runner, and more importantly we're going to be talking about the engine that will most likely be put in this new 4Runner and why this is so important. Before we get in the video though, first and foremost, as always, if you want to save time and money the next time you purchase a car, link to my car buying guide in the description down below. Let's get into it. So if you guys haven't seen my first video on the 2024 Toyota 4Runner, basically for the 2024 model year, the 4Runner will most likely be redesigned unless this is pushed back to 2025. We already know that 2023 will not be a redesign year because we already have a special anniversary edition for the 2023 model year 4Runner, and it's based on the current body style and not on some new body style. So that was the first bit of information I talked about in the first video, and then the fact that this will be built off of the same platform. Well, I shouldn't say the same exact platform, but a modified version of the platform that underpins the new Toyota Tundra and Sequoia. Obviously it has to be modified to work with the 4Runner that's a smaller sized vehicle compared to both of those. So it's still going to be a body on frame SUV with a solid rear axle and independent front suspension, and then on top of that it's going to have a completely new exterior. You guys can see the photo here that we have in the video to kind of guess at what the 4Runner could potentially look like with the redesign, and then the interior is also going to be completely redesigned as well. Toyota obviously has the theme that they're going for with all of their new body on frame vehicles. Look at the Tundra and the Sequoia, they have like that kind of like military theme for a lot of the different packages. Obviously the luxury versions of those vehicles don't have that theme, but if you look at like the TRD Sport, for example, and the Tundra, or the TRD Pros with the Tundra and with the Sequoia as well, then they kind of have that like military utilitarian type interior, bigger infotainment system, digital gauge cluster available on higher end models, whereas lower end models will still have a mostly analog gauge cluster. Again, that was the main stuff that we talked about in the initial video, and I just wanted to quickly recap that with this video. But the thing I want to focus on is powertrains, because in that video I talked about how the powertrain that everyone's pretty much talking about with the new 4Runner is the turbocharged 2.4 liter four-cylinder that is currently in the new Lexus NX. And guess what? I happen to have a Lexus NX this week as a tester, and I also happen to own a 2022 Toyota 4Runner TRD Pro. And so I've now had the opportunity to drive both of those vehicles back to back and feel how both of those powertrains feel. Obviously, two completely different platforms, so it's not exactly an apples to apples comparison in terms of driving the same exact vehicle with two different engines, but I can at least kind of see the characteristics with both of the powertrains, and this has me slightly concerned. So here's the first concern that pretty much everyone has with Toyota right now, because they're going towards turbocharged engines, and that is reliability, right? That's what happened when Toyota went from the big 5.7 V8 in the Tundra to the new twin turbo 3.5 liter V6, as everyone's like, oh crap, turbocharged V6 not as reliable as the V8, and frankly the V6 has had some issues. Most of it has been covered under recalls, and so it's kind of just been fixed, frankly. But again, that's kind of like the first worry is, well, right now the 4Runner has a naturally aspirated 4-liter V6 that is tried and true, super reliable, like we can trust it, and this new turbocharged 2.4 liter four-cylinder, not so sure on that. And again, turbocharged engines typically just don't last as long as good old big displacement naturally aspirated engines. So that's the first concern. The bigger concern though is with the driving dynamics. So the 4-liter V6 in the 4Runner is not a quick engine by any means. Like it's not winning any races, but it does have some characteristics that just add this character to the 4Runner that just, it feels perfect. So if you guys have never driven a 4Runner, the best way to describe it is you feel like you get this punch of torque with the 4-liter V6. Even though it's naturally aspirated and technically will produce max torque at higher RPMs compared to most turbocharged engines, it's still just, it feels like punchier. And that's the thing I've noticed with these large displacement naturally aspirated engines, is they have this punch that smaller displacement turbocharged engines, even with their higher torque figures, just can't seem to replicate. And so that's the first thing about the 4Runner that's very important. And with the powertrain in the Lexus NX that'll most likely be the powertrain in the 4Runner, it just doesn't have that same feel. You feel like you have to dive into the throttle more to get it to do anything at lower speeds, and so it kind of feels a little bit weird, and it's going to completely change the characteristics of the 4Runner both on-road and off-road. And the next thing is, when you go go full throttle. And this is where I'm a little bit less worried, I suppose, because in the current 4Runner, when you go full throttle, it doesn't really do much. It just, has the normal naturally aspirated power curve where it just, gets more and more as you get closer to red line, and then you shift gears, right? But it's not a lot of horsepower, and it's a pretty heavy vehicle, and so it doesn't really like push you in the back of your seat or anything like that. It's pretty dang slow. Whereas this turbocharged engine, it does kind of feel like it builds a little bit more power. It does have that kind of like old school turbo feel in a sense, where there's a little bit of lag and then it kind of pushes you, which I think would feel good for a lot of people with the 4Runner on, a lot of daily driving circumstances, like getting onto the highway, for example. So this isn't all negative in this video. I just got to kind of mention that. But the thing that I need to come back to is the 4Runner is all about off-roading. That's kind of what this vehicle is intended for. Even though not everyone takes their 4Runners off-road, it's kind of like a dedicated off-road platform. And so that low-speed stuff is really important. And again, that's where that turbocharged engine feels a little bit weird. So I think that Toyota might have to do quite a bit in terms of working with this engine to make it so that it really does develop strong low-end torque, so that it, probably won't perfectly mimic what the 4.0 feels like, but it, hopefully they can get it pretty dang close. Now the next thing is competitiveness with other vehicles in this segment. So right now, the 4Runner still sells in massive numbers because of that whole reliability factor. But if Toyota goes to a turbocharged engine, people might not trust it as much, and so then they might be looking at other vehicles in the segment like the Ford Bronco and the Jeep Wrangler. And both of those vehicles have significantly more power with certain powertrains compared to the 4Runner. Again, a lot of people don't buy those two because they're like, oh, Toyota's more reliable. But again, if we make the switch, then people might make the switch over to those brands. And so there has been talks of a hybrid version of this 2.4 liter four-cylinder. Now, hopefully Toyota does it justice and keeps it with the torque converter automatic, the 8-speed automatic that's in the NX, so that it has smooth gear shifts. Because if they do a CVT 4Runner, oh boy, the internet will be completely on fire if they do a CVT 4Runner. That's all I gotta say. But they just need to make sure that that hybrid is competitive from a power perspective, compared to the Jeep Wrangler with the 4xe that has 375 horsepower and 470 pound-feet of torque. And again, you've got the 392 Wrangler that's 470 horsepower, 470 pound-feet of torque. And then you have like the Bronco Raptor, over 400 horsepower and over 400 pound-feet of torque. And even a regular Bronco can have well over 300 horsepower and over 400 pound-feet of torque with the 2.7 V6. So Toyota needs to do just a little bit more with the 4Runner, and I think that a really good thing for them to do that they're probably not going to do is just put the engine from the Tundra into the 4Runner, the 3.5 V6. They don't need to do the hybrid version. I think that would be complete overkill and complexity that people don't really need. The regular 3.5 V6 is actually a really solid powertrain. I really like that powertrain in the Tundra. I haven't driven the Sequoia yet, but in the Tundra, I really like that powertrain. And if that powertrain was in a smaller vehicle, aka the 4Runner, that would be an absolute blast to drive. And Toyota's obviously spending a lot of time with fine-tuning that 3.5 to make sure that it's going to be reliable long-term. And so I think eventually people would shift over to that. And from a sales perspective, I think a lot of 4Runners would be sold with, if they did those two engines, if they did the 2.4 and the 3.5, a lot of 4Runners would be sold with the 2.4 four-cylinder initially. But then I think you'd see a lot of people slowly migrate over to the 3.5 because they want the extra power that provides. And I think that frankly Toyota would be able to cannibalize a lot of sales from Jeep and from Ford, because the 4Runner is just frankly a more practical vehicle compared to the Wrangler and the Bronco. And so if it had that practicality and just as much acceleration and fun on-road driving experience as what you can get with the Wrangler and the Bronco, I think for a lot of people it would be a no-brainer. Let me know what you guys think about the new 4Runner from a powertrain perspective. What would be your ideal powertrain for the new 4Runner? And with that being said, I'll see all of you in that next video.